to establish and regulate commercial, medical, and recreational marijuana facilities in the city of Taylor.
Make a motion.
Support.
Okay, I have a motion by Councilwoman Cross, supported by Councilman Johnson. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mayor?
if I may, before we get into the questions, if it's okay with the City Council, I'd like to invite Dave Greco up and let Dave walk through an overview of what's in front of you, what's different than what was previously approved, and then we can facilitate any questions that Dave may not address at that point in time.
Okay, Mr. Greco?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you through the chair. All right, what you have in front of you is kind of a repeal and replace of Chapter 11 medical marijuana. Just to give a little history here, you know, the state of Michigan now has essentially 3 marijuana statutes, state statutes. You have the Medical Marijuana Act that was passed by referendum 12 years ago. Then about 4 years ago, you have the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act. And then a couple of years after that, you have the Medical Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act, which is the recreational. So we went from individual decriminalization use of marijuana to the Medical Commercial Facilities Statute of Marijuana to now another recreational use for commercial statutes in the state of Michigan, which is the typical run, the way it's been running through all these states in the United States. It's the way the industry kind of does it, right? So a couple of years ago, as you guys are aware, we passed Chapter 11, Medical Marijuana Facilities Act. Well, when the state passed the recreational facilities commercial license, it addressed them in different ways. You would think that they would just say, hey, whatever we did with the medical marijuana facilities, we'll allow recreational and we'll do all the same stuff. You have the same types of retailers, provisioning centers, growers, processors, and they're all allowed to do different stuff, or the same stuff. But what happens is when they pass the recreational, and I think this is intentional, all the definitions are slightly different. The amounts that you can grow, if you're a class A, B, or C grower, why they made the amounts slightly different for each one, I don't know, but to cause us all headaches and to deal with this stuff. In addition to naming the stuff differently, like instead of a retailer, it's an establishment or a facility and all those things. So what happened is we passed a medical marijuana facilities ordinance to allow certain medical marijuana facilities, and then after that, the recreational statute was passed. So what is in front of you right now is a wholesale swap out of Chapter 11, because once I sat down to go through after, as you know, the council, what we did, I believe, a year ago was opt out of recreational to put the brakes on everything so we could sit back, see what's going on, and then come forward with what we wanted to do. Go ahead.
Did we opt out, or we just didn't do anything, I think, at that point?
No, we actually opted out of recreational.
Okay.
Because, just a good question, so with the Medical Marijuana Facilities Act, you didn't have to do anything. You either passed an ordinance and you allowed the facilities or you didn't. Now with the Recreational Act, they put in there that if you're a community, you better opt out or else you're going to be in. So we did take that affirmative step to opt out, to put the brakes on it to see what's there.
Mr. Chairman, it was a good, it was a good thing that we ended up doing that too, and I think that was, Mr. Greco not telling us to opt in or opt out, but advising that if we didn't plan to accept licenses, that opting out was the appropriate thing to do. And I think it was excellent advice because there was a number of communities, I think Detroit was one of them, and several throughout Metro Detroit that didn't opt out. People applied for a license, people attempted to open up in a municipality, and then elected officials started to say, wait a minute, we don't want you to do that, and there ended up being a number of lawsuits because they chose not to opt out. So wherever this takes us going forward, fine, but it was a good decision at the time to opt out until we got all our ducks in a row.
Sure, to put the brakes on everything and see where we wanted to go. So when I started looking at our Medical Marijuana Chapter 11 Facilities Licensing Act, and I started to kind of incorporate what I wanted to incorporate, it just didn't make any sense. I mean, you would be looking in front of you at an entire redlined a document, that it didn't make any sense for me to do it. So I just decided to do the first draft of just swap it out, change all the definitions and all the things we wanted to do. And then, quite frankly, there were two things with regard to our original ordinance that I did not like, which was raised in some questions by Mrs. Winton today, as far as regulations. The current one that we have on the books for medical marijuana facilities has a ton of stuff in there. You gotta do this, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. It sounds like a good thing to do, but it's a lot to do on a local level. And this is a heavily regulated industry that all of these licenses have to go to the state, and there's extensive regulations from the state on what they have to do regarding security, regarding cameras, regarding all that stuff. Now, there might be some things that this city wants to do in particular to make sure that they want to do, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to, I'll say, rewrite the state regulations that they have to follow anyway to do what we want to do here. And with the original medical marijuana ordinance that we passed, I think, as you remember, as we passed it, there were some emails and some communications from me that I was, kind of uncomfortable with Article 1. I didn't think that it would be something that would be very enforceable, and that was with respect to the residential regulation of the medical marijuana caregivers, because there had just been case after case after case from the appellate courts and the Supreme Court just constantly coming down in favor of being able to grow and use and do whatever you want in marijuana, and anti the local regulation for those things, all right? So what happened since then, and that's going to be a separate discussion after I go through this, is that the Supreme Court this summer did provide municipalities with some regulation, or the ability to regulate, with regard to medical marijuana caregivers under the Medical Act, but I'll address that at the end because this is just commercial that we're dealing with right now. So what you have in front of you is a swap out of Chapter 11 medical marijuana to change it to medical marijuana facilities and marijuana establishments, because that's what they're called under the recreational statute. Why they called it differently, I don't know. So going through this, it provides for essentially, it provides the definitions, and it provides for licensing of certain commercial facilities in the city, including grower licenses in the city, processor licenses, secure transporter, provisioning center retailers, that would be the dispensary, safety compliance, and marijuana micro business licenses. These were the types of facilities that the advisory committee, I'll call it, or the committee that was reviewing this, were in favor of. Just the numbers that are set forth in this ordinance right now, I think they were discussed a bit at our last meeting, but it certainly wasn't set in stone. And that I recall specifically that the discussion was for the city council to kind of have a discussion and decide what seemed to be the appropriate number or not. So they're not set in stone. It does provide that still marijuana commercial facilities be located in the I-1 and I-2 zoning districts. It does provide a one change that Councilperson Winton pointed out, as far as instead of being 1,000 feet away from the nearest lines of a residential zoning district and some of the other things listed, to 500 feet. I don't know if that was one of the meetings. We did look at some maps at a certain time and talked about, like, well, if it was 1,000 feet, we're cutting down the space from here over there, and there might be some commercial buildings, but
I'm going to jump in here because that's one of my big questions, and I can't understand how we would go through this. So basically, I just want to ask one quick question. Mm-hmm. You made the changes based on, are you saying that all the changes in this change was your idea? You just kind of threw it in there or whatever?
No, I would say that it's based upon the general ideas from our original Chapter 11 medical marijuana. It was just more complicated to redline everything, especially with the definitions and stuff. So what I do, as a municipal lawyer, you kind of look at the state statute, you look at what some other communities are doing, you look at what you've done as far as what's similar and what's not similar. Okay, yeah. And this was the idea as far as the format that I thought best fit with what our original idea was from the original one. Again, it's pared down a bit.
Well, I got to disagree with you on that.
Okay.
But that's what gave me a heart attack when I saw the number of facilities that were added. But that is one of my biggest questions, that who came up with the idea and how was it determined to go from 1,000 feet from a school, a park or whatever to 500 feet?